Jack rushed back upon learning of Tu Tien's suffering. Late in the afternoon, the London sky was a dull grey, with a light drizzle tapping against the glass window of the small cafe, where Jack often spent his evenings. He absent-mindedly stirred the coffee in front of him, but made no move to drink it. A vague emptiness crept into his heart. Ever since leaving Tu Tien, he had told himself to move on, to learn how to forget the woman he once loved. But the more he tried to forget, the more he remembered her gentle gaze, the softness in her voice when she told stories, the nights they spent together on the balcony, watching the city lights flicker to life. Everything remained unchanged, except that he was no longer by her side. Suddenly his phone vibrated in his pocket. Jack glanced at the screen. It was a message from an old friend back home. "Jack, do you know Tu Tien is not well? She barely sleeps and has nightmares every night. She has lost a lot of weight. Everyone is worried." Jack felt his heart tighten, as if someone had squeezed it in their grip. His breath grew heavy, his eyes fixed on the words on the screen. His throat went dry. He hurriedly typed back, "How is she now? She just cries into her pillow every night. Can you come back?" That single question was like a knife, cutting deep into Jack's soul. He didn't need to think, he only knew one thing. He had to go back immediately. The flight home. Jack left the cafe without even grabbing his coat. The night had fallen and the rain had grown heavier, but he paid no attention to it. His hurried footsteps echoed on the wet pavement as he moved through the bustling streets. Cars sped by, but his mind was consumed by a single thought. Tu Tien was suffering, she needed him. When he reached his apartment, Jack tossed his keys onto the table and yanked open his closet. He didn't waste time deliberating, just threw a few clothes into his suitcase, grabbed his essentials, and pulled out his phone to book a ticket. "The next flight home," he muttered, his eyes scanning the screen anxiously. There was a flight at 6 a.m., the earliest possible option. Jack clenched his jaw in frustration, but quickly confirmed the booking. His heart pounded in his chest. Every passing second felt like it was pushing Tu Tien further into despair. Sitting on the edge of his bed, he exhaled deeply. The white walls of his apartment felt colder than ever before, suffocating in their emptiness. He closed his eyes and the memories came flooding back. When was the last time he saw Tu Tien? Yes, it was raining that day too. She had stood by the door, her eyes filled with inch tears. She hadn't begged him to stay, hadn't broken down, she had simply whispered, "If you believe leaving is what's best, I won't stop you, but Jack, I'm scared, I'm afraid that once you're gone, I won't know how to be myself anymore." And he had walked away, ignoring the screaming protest of his heart. Now knowing that she was barely holding on, he realized how terribly wrong he had been. Waiting for the flight the next morning, Jack arrived at the airport long before departure. His luggage was light, but the weight in his chest was unbearable. He sat in a corner, his eyes locked on the departure board, willing time to pass faster. Suddenly an announcement came over the speakers. "Attention passengers on the 6 a.m. flight to Vietnam. Due to inclement weather, the flight has been delayed by 30 minutes. Jack clenched his fists, he glanced outside the window. Rain continued to drizzle onto the runway. Just 30 minutes, but it felt like an eternity. He leaned back in his chair, exhaustion settling in, but his mind refused to rest. Images of Tu Tien flooded his thoughts. Her curled up figure on the bed, her hollow eyes, her fragile hands trembling in the dark. The thought of her suffering alone was unbearable. When the speakers finally announced that boarding was about to begin, Jack shot to his feet, grabbing his suitcase and heading toward the gate. Without hesitation at that moment. He knew no matter what happened, he would never leave her again. As the plane taxied down the runway, Jack closed his eyes and took a deep breath. In just a few hours he would see her again. And this time he would never let her go. Jack searches for two channel midfields of love. The plane touched down at the hometown airport, just as the afternoon began to set in. Jack moved quickly through immigration, his heart tightening with the weight of his thoughts. Where was Tu Tien? Was she okay? He had imagined their reunion hundreds of times. But now all that remained was a deep, overwhelming worrying. Without hesitation, Jack flagged down a taxi, his voice urgent as he spoke to the driver. To the Wisteria farm as fast as possible. The car sped down the winding country roads. Lush green fields stretched on both sides. Trees swayed gently in the breeze. Everything looked exactly the same as when he and Tu Tien were together, only his heart had changed. Heavier, more restless, aching with longing. The farm without Tu Tien. As soon as the taxi pulled up at the farm's gate, Jack jumped out, not even waiting for his change. He rushed inside, his eyes scanning every corner. But there was no sign of Tu Tien. The farm workers looked surprised to see Jack. A young woman recognized him and spoke up. "Jack, you're back." Jack, breathless, asked urgently, "Where is Tu Tien? Is she here?" The woman shook her head. "She went to harvest fruit this morning, and then took it to the market to sell. She should be on her way back now." Jack felt his heart sink. He had hoped to see her the moment he arrived, to hold her in his arms instantly, but she wasn't there. Searching in vain, unable to wait, Jack set out to find her. He walked past rows of blooming wisteria, through fields of lush green strawberry plants. His shadow stretched across the earth as he moved from one field to another, calling her name, Tu Tien. Only the wind responded, carrying the faint scent of grass and flowers. He stopped in the middle of a golden wheat field, his legs growing weak from exhaustion. A vague fear crept into his chest. Had she left? Had he come back? Too late. Jack turned back toward the farm, his heart weighed down by despair. But just as he reached the gate, a distant sound broke through the silence. He turned quickly, and his heart nearly leapt from his chest. Tu Tien. The moment of reunion. She was stepping down from a wooden cart, filled with baskets of fruit and fresh flowers. Her figure was small, but carried the same familiar grace. Her white linen blouse for smudges of soil, her hair slightly tousled from the wind. But to Jack, she was just as beautiful as the first day he met her. Tu Tien had barely set foot on the ground when Jack rushed forward. Tu Tien. She startled, her white eyes filled with surprise. But before she could utter a word, Jack pulled her into his arms. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I was wrong." His voice broke. He buried his face in her hair, inhaling the warmth he had longed for all this time. Tu Tien stood frozen for a moment, her hands trembling as they slowly reached his back. This feeling, it wasn't a dream. Was it? "Jack, you're back." Jack nodded, still holding her tight. "I was gone for too long, but from now on, I'm not going anywhere." Tu Tien bit her lip, her eyes turning red, and finally, she wrapped her arms around him, as if afraid that if she let go, he would disappear again. A night to remember. That night, Jack and Tu Tien sat together in the small room, where they had once been so happy. The breeze outside carried the gentle scent of wild flowers, weaving through the warm air between them. They didn't talk much, just sat in comfortable silence. Then prepared a simple meal together, just like the old days. Jack roasted sweet potatoes over the fire, while Tu Tien brewed tea. The mingling scents of roasted potatoes, and herbal tea filled the room with an unspoken warmth. As the night deepened, Jack pulled her close as they lay on the small bed. They didn't need grand words. Just the steady comfort of each other's presence. "Are you still angry with me?" Jack whispered. Tu Tien shook her head slightly, pressing her head against his chest. "I just fear you leave again." Jack held her tighter, his voice firm but gentle. "Never, I'll stay by your side always." And that night, under the soft glow of the moon, Jack and Tu Tien found their way back to each other, as if they had never been apart.